Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we're diving into a theory
Oh, yeah.
that's pretty crucial for anyone interested in international relations.
Absolutely.
And especially for our listeners who are prepping for the UPSC exam.
Yeah, definitely.
We're talking about Samuel Huntington's
Oh, yes.
Clash of Civilizations thesis.
Right.
It's controversial, thought-provoking,
For sure.
and something you might just encounter on your exam.
It's a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
Because it really pushes us to think about culture,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Not just economics or military might
Right.
as a major force in global politics.
Okay, so let's set the stage here.
Okay.
Picture this. It's 1993. The Cold War is over.
Right.
The world is trying to figure out what this new global order
Yeah.
is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And then along comes Huntington,
Yeah.
and he drops this bombshell.
Uh-huh.
He said, forget ideologies. The future of conflict
Mm-hmm.
is all about civilizations clashing.
His argument is that civilizations, which are basically culture writ large, are the most powerful actors on the world stage.
Okay.
And because they have such fundamentally different values,
Yeah.
conflict between them is inevitable.
Inevitable conflict.
Yeah.
That
You know,
sounds pretty bleak.
It does a bit.
Especially right after the Cold War ended.
Yeah.
I mean, wasn't everyone hoping for more cooperation and peace?
Well, there was definitely a lot of optimism in the air, but Huntington kind of came in with this dose of realism.
Yeah.
And, you know, his ideas actually gained even more traction after 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
Which tragically seemed to confirm his predictions about clashes between the West and the Islamic world.
Okay, so it's not just about terrorism.
Uh-huh.
How did Huntington envision these cultural clashes
Mm-hmm.
playing out on the world stage?
Well, he talks about conflicts happening at two levels.
Okay.
At the micro level, he points to fault lines.
Yeah.
These zones where different civilizations meet and rub up against each other,
Mhm.
leading to things like ethnic violence and communal wars.
So almost like those historical border disputes where different cultures have been vying for control.
Exactly. Then there's the macro level, which is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Huntington argues that core states
Hmm.
representing different civilizations will eventually clash
Right.
as they compete for power and influence.
Okay.
He was especially worried about conflict between China and the West and the Islamic world,
Yeah.
and even a possible alliance between Confucian and Islamic states against the West.
Wow. Those are some pretty high-stakes predictions.
Right.
It sounds like he's painting a picture of a world divided along cultural lines with conflict as the inevitable outcome.
Yeah.
But wasn't there pushback against this idea?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it seems like a pretty bold statement to say that civilizations are destined to clash.
It is, and Huntington's theory has been hugely controversial
Yeah.
and sparked a ton of debate.
Right.
One of the main criticisms is that it oversimplifies things,
Okay.
portraying civilizations as these homogeneous blocks.
Right. When in reality, they're incredibly diverse and fluid.
So critics are saying that cultures are more like interconnected webs than separate clashing entities.
Precisely. They argue that throughout history, cultures have constantly exchanged ideas, blended and evolved.
Yeah.
Reducing them to these monolithic entities ignores all that complexity and creates artificial divisions.
Right.
Plus, they point out that focusing solely on cultural differences
Mm-hmm.
risks overlooking other crucial factors that contribute to conflict,
Okay.
like political and economic tensions.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
It seems like reducing complex cultural identities to these simple blocks could lead to dangerous misunderstandings and even exacerbate existing tensions.
Exactly. And critics take it a step further,
Okay.
accusing Huntington of committing culturalism.
Culturalism.
They argue that he makes the same mistake as those who subscribe to economism,
Oh, wow.
explaining everything solely through one lens.
Okay.
In this case, it's culture.
That's an interesting comparison to economism.
Yeah. But isn't culture inherently tied to politics and economics?
Right.
How do we separate them entirely?
That's the heart of the critique.
Okay.
Critics argue that Huntington overemphasizes cultural factors at the expense of political and social influences on identity.
Gotcha.
To illustrate this, they often point to the ethnic conflicts in the former Yugoslavia.
Okay.
Those were triggered by the political vacuum left by the collapse of communism,
Right.
not ancient cultural hatreds.
So they're saying that the conflict was driven more by power dynamics and political opportunism than deep-seated cultural differences.
Exactly. And they extend that argument to other conflicts,
Okay.
like the rise of militant Islam,
Right.
while some might see it as a clash of civilizations.
Yeah.
Critics argue it's more about political and economic injustices in the Middle East.
Okay.
Things like the legacy of colonialism, oppressive regimes, and poverty fueling resentment and extremism.
That's a really crucial point.
Yep.
It seems like attributing everything to a clash of civilizations could lead us to misdiagnose the root causes of conflicts
For sure.
and prevent us from finding effective solutions.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to understand the nuances of this theory,
Yeah.
its strengths and its weaknesses.
Right?
It's important to remember that even though Huntington's theory has its flaws,
Right.
it doesn't mean it's completely irrelevant.
Okay.
It sparked a crucial conversation about culture's role in international relations,
Yeah.
something that wasn't getting enough attention before.
So it's not a perfect theory,
Right.
but it's a valuable starting point for understanding how cultural factors can influence global politics.
Exactly. One of Huntington's key insights is highlighting the growing significance of culture.
Yeah.
In a world where ideology seems less dominant,
Okay.
think about the rise of religious movements after the Cold War.
That's a great point.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like in the absence of those grand ideological narratives,
Yeah.
people are turning to their cultural and religious identities
Uh-huh.
for a sense of belonging and meaning.
Right. And Huntington helps us understand the backlash against globalization
Okay.
and Western dominance, too.
Right.
Even if it doesn't lead to a full-blown clash of civilizations,
Yeah.
that resentment towards Western cultural influence
Mm-hmm.
is a powerful force shaping global politics today.
That makes sense. We're seeing that play out in different ways
Yeah,
all over the world.
for sure.
But it sounds like Huntington's theory isn't all doom and gloom.
Right.
He seems to acknowledge that things aren't quite so black and white. Right?
Absolutely. While he acknowledges the potential for cultural differences to fuel conflict,
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't necessarily see a global war between major powers as inevitable.
Okay.
He recognizes that there are ways to manage these tensions and prevent them from escalating into full-blown clashes.
So there's some room for diplomacy and understanding
Yeah.
to play a role in navigating these cultural fault lines.
Yes. And he even cautions against certain Western approaches,
Okay.
like aggressively pushing for democracy everywhere,
Right.
which he argues can backfire and intensify anti-Western sentiment.
That's a fascinating point. It goes against the conventional wisdom that promoting democracy is the best way to ensure peace and stability.
Right.
He's basically saying that imposing Western values on other cultures can be counterproductive and could actually lead to more conflict.
Precisely. He advocates for a more nuanced approach to international relations,
Okay.
one that recognizes the importance of cultural sensitivity and understanding.
Right.
He also emphasizes the importance of shifting power balances
Yeah.
in the global landscape,
Okay.
particularly the rise of China as a major factor shaping the future of international relations.
So even though he's focused on cultural clashes, he's not ignoring the traditional power dynamics
Nope.
and the influence of rising powers.
Not at all. He brings together cultural factors and geopolitical realities to paint a more comprehensive picture.
It seems like we've only scratched the surface of this theory.
Yeah,
It's clear why it's been so influential, even if it's sparked so much debate.
for sure.
For our listeners who are prepping for the UPSC, how should they approach this theory for the exam?
UPSC aspirants definitely need to have a solid grasp of Huntington's clash of civilizations theory. It's frequently discussed in international relations.
Right.
And understanding its nuances can really set you apart.
Yeah.
But remember, it's not about blindly accepting or rejecting the theory.
So it's not enough to just memorize the main points.
Exactly. What the examiners are looking for is critical thinking. You need to be able to analyze the theory, identify its strengths and weaknesses, and apply it to real-world situations.
So, for example, could a UPSC aspirant use this theory to analyze a contemporary conflict, like tensions between China and the United States?
Absolutely. They could examine how cultural differences, like contrasting views on democracy and human rights, might be exacerbating the political and economic competition between the two countries.
Right.
But they should also be able to discuss alternative explanations for the conflict,
Okay.
going beyond just a simple clash of civilizations.
It sounds like the key is to use Huntington's theory as a lens for understanding complex global issues,
Yeah,
but not the only lens.
precisely. And remember, the UPSC exam is not just about showcasing your knowledge.
Right.
It's about demonstrating your ability to think critically and engage with different perspectives.
That's great advice for UPSC listeners.
Yeah.
But even beyond the exam,
Yeah.
this theory has implications for how we understand the world around us, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
While Huntington's theory might not predict the future perfectly,
Right.
it reminds us that cultural differences can significantly impact global politics. We see this in the rise of identity politics, religious resurgence, and the resistance to globalization in various parts of the world.
So even though we may not be headed for an all-out clash of civilizations,
Right.
Huntington's work encourages us to be mindful of how cultural factors can exacerbate existing tensions and fuel conflicts.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of cultural understanding and sensitivity in navigating our increasingly interconnected world.
That's a great takeaway for all of us, not just those studying for the UPSC.
Right.
This conversation has been incredibly insightful.
Well, thank you.
And I'm sure our listeners are walking away with a lot to think about. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Huntington's clash of civilizations theory, I want to ask our listeners something. How do you see cultural factors shaping global politics today? Are we witnessing a clash of civilizations or something more complex?
It's a question worth pondering. And for our UPSC aspirants, remember, don't just stop at Huntington. Explore other perspectives on culture and international relations, like the role of cultural diplomacy and soft power.
That's a great point. There are so many other frameworks out there that can help us understand the interplay of culture, power, and conflict.
The key takeaway is that the world is rarely black and white. So engage with different theories, analyze them critically, and form your own conclusions.
This has been a fascinating discussion, and I hope our listeners are feeling empowered to do just that. Remember, whether you're prepping for the UPSC or simply curious about the world, understanding these concepts is crucial for navigating the complexities of global politics.
It's about developing a nuanced perspective and recognizing that cultural factors, while significant, are just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Well said. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Huntington's theory, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more insightful explorations of complex topics. We'll be back soon with another episode that will challenge your thinking and expand your understanding of the world.
Until then, keep those brains buzzing and those curiosity levels high. Happy diving.
See you next time.